Mirelle Ashvale owned exactly one beautiful thing in this world, her mother's pale blue silk gown. It was her only inheritance, her only ticket to the mating ball, and her only hope of escaping a life of servitude. But when she found a dying wolf in a freezing ditch, bleeding out into the mud, she didn't hesitate. She didn't think about her future. With shaking hands, she took the hem of the silk, and she ripped it. She tore her future into strips to bind the wounds of a beast she didn't even know. She thought she was saving a stray. She didn't know she was saving King Malek Thornveil, and she certainly didn't know that for every inch of silk she sacrificed, he would burn a city to the ground just to see her smile again. Welcome back to Luna Romance Collections. Before we step into the snow and mud with Mirelle, I want to take a moment to wish a very happy Thanksgiving to all my listeners in the U.S. Whether you are surrounded by family today or taking a quiet moment just for yourself, I am so grateful that you chose to spend part of your holiday with me. I am thankful for every single one of you who listens, comments, and shares these stories. Now, let's escape into a story about a sacrifice that changed a kingdom. Chapter 1. The Silk and the Storm. The wind in the Blackwood Forest did not just blow, it bit. It had teeth made of ice and malice, gnawing at any exposed skin until it was numb and raw. Mirelle Ashvale tucked her chin deeper into the threadbare wool of her cloak, clutching the oilcloth bundle against her chest as if it contained the crown jewels. In a way, it contained something far more valuable than gold. Inside the waterproof wrapping was the dress. Her mother's dress. It was a cascade of pale blue silk that shimmered like a frozen lake under the moonlight. For 3 years, Mirelle had kept it hidden in a hollow beneath the floorboards of the servants' quarters, terrified that Veressa Crowthorne would find it and burn it out of spite. But tonight, with the storm rolling in and the moon festival only 2 days away, Mirelle had risked everything to sneak it out to the old wash basin by the river to clean a small stain from the hem. Now she was paying the price for her boldness. The storm had descended faster than a hawk diving for prey. The sky had turned a bruised, angry purple, and the snow was coming down in thick, wet clumps that blinded her and turned the dirt path into a treacherous slide of freezing mud. Mirelle's boots, worn thin at the soles, found no purchase. She slipped, her knee slamming into a tree root, but she didn't cry out. She simply tightened her grip on the bundle. She would break every bone in her body before she let that dress fall into the mud. "Just a little farther," she whispered to the howling wind. "Just get to the stables." She forced herself forward, fighting the gale. But as she crested the ridge that overlooked the ravine, a sound cut through the roar of the wind. It wasn't the crack of a branch or the hoot of an owl. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated suffering, a low, wet gurgle that vibrated in the air, heavy with pain. Mirelle froze. The smart thing to do was run. The Blackwood was full of things that viewed humans as snacks, and a wounded beast was often more dangerous than a healthy one. But Mirelle had never been good at being smart when it came to suffering. She had spent too much of her life hurting to ignore it in others. She stepped toward the edge of the ravine and looked down. At first she thought a boulder had fallen into the ditch. The shape was massive, a dark mound almost swallowed by the rising snow. But then the boulder heaved, a shuddering breath that rattled its entire frame. It was a wolf, but it was no ordinary wolf. It was a monster of a creature, jet black as a starless midnight, easily the size of a warhorse. Even from this distance she could see the power in its limbs, the lethal curve of claws that dug futilely into the frozen earth. He was dying. Mirelle scrambled down the embankment, her fear forgotten. She slid the last few feet, landing in the icy slush at the bottom of the ditch. Up close, the wolf was terrifying. His head was massive, his muzzle parted to reveal teeth that could snap her waist in two. But his eyes were closed, and his breathing was shallow and ragged. "Easy," she murmured, her voice trembling as she approached. "I'm not going to hurt you." The wolf didn't move. He was too far gone to care about a small human girl. Mirelle knelt in the mud, ignoring the way the freezing water soaked instantly through her skirts. She reached out, her hand hovering over his flank, and gasped. The heat radiating off him was intense, a fever burning so hot it almost scorched her palm. But it was the smell that made her gag. Beneath the scent of wet fur and pine, there was something rancid, like sulfur and rotting meat. She moved her hand down his side and found the source. A jagged wound tore across his ribs, deep and ugly. But the blood wasn't red. It was a dark, viscous purple, oozing sluggishly like tar. The flesh around the cut was blackened, pulsating with a sickly rhythm. "Dark magic," she whispered, the color draining from her face. This was no hunting accident. This wolf had been struck by a cursed blade. "You poor thing," she breathed. "You're fighting a poison meant to kill you in minutes, aren't you?" She had to stop the bleeding. If she didn't, the poison would work its way into his heart, and this magnificent creature would be nothing more than a carcass in the snow. She looked around frantically. The ravine was barren. There was only snow, mud, and frozen rock. She grabbed a handful of moss from a nearby stone, shaking the snow off it, and pressed it against the wound. The wolf let out a sharp whine, his body jerking. I know, Mirelle soothed, pressing harder. I'm sorry. But the moss was useless. The dark blood soaked through it in seconds, coating her hands in that thick, oily substance. It was coming too fast. She needed bandages. She needed something thick, something absorbent, something to pack the wound and bind it tight. She looked down at herself. She was wearing her servant's uniform, a rough, scratchy wool that was covered in stable muck. If she put that on the open wound, the infection would kill him faster than the blood loss. Her cloak was too thick and dirty to tear. She had nothing. Her eyes fell on the oilcloth bundle sitting on the dry rock where she had placed it. No. The thought was immediate, instinctive. No, not that. Anything but that. She looked back at the wolf. His breathing was hitching now. The rise and fall of his ribs was becoming erratic. He was fading. Mirelle looked at the bundle again. Inside was the blue silk. It was flawless. It was delicate. It was the only thing connecting her to the memory of a mother who had loved her. It was the dress she was going to wear to the moon festival, where she hoped, prayed, that some merchant or farmer might see her and offer for her hand, taking her away from Baressa's cruelty. That dress was her freedom. I can't, she whispered, tears pricking her eyes, hot and stinging against the cold wind. Please don't ask me to do that. The wolf let out a long, exhaling sigh, his head lolled to the side, sinking into the mud. He was giving up. Mirelle looked at his defenseless neck. He was a predator, a killer, a beast of the wilds, but right now, he was just a living thing that didn't want to die alone in the cold. Curse it all, she sobbed. She scrambled over to the rock and snatched up the bundle. Her fingers fumbled with the knots, numb from the cold and shaking with adrenaline. The oilcloth fell away, revealing the liquid moonlight of the silk. It was so beautiful it hurt to look at. She pulled it out, the fabric catching the wind, dancing like a ghost in the storm. I'm sorry, Mama, she choked out. I'm so sorry. She found the hem of the skirt. She gripped the delicate fabric in both fists. She hesitated for one heartbeat, closing her eyes, imagining herself dancing in the village square, free and happy. Then she pulled. The sound of the silk tearing was louder than the thunder. It was a sharp, screaming rip that severed her ties to the life she had hoped for. It sounded like a bone breaking. She tore a long, wide strip, then another and another. With every rip, she was destroying her future. She was ensuring that she would remain a servant, invisible and scorned, with nothing beautiful to call her own. She was tearing up her dignity and throwing it into the mud. Clutching the handfuls of ruined silk, she scrambled back to the wolf. Stay with me, she ordered, her voice fierce and wet with tears. Don't you dare die after I did this for you. She packed the silk into the jagged wound. The fabric immediately stained purple, the beautiful blue drinking up the corruption. She took the longer strips and wrapped them around his massive torso, tying them as tight as her freezing fingers could manage. The silk held. The flow of the dark blood slowed, then stopped. Mirelle slumped back on her heels, gasping for air. Her hands were stained purple. Her dress, her beautiful, precious dress, was gone. All that remained were tattered scraps of the bodice blowing across the rocks. She was shivering violently now. The cold was settling into her marrow like heavy lead. Slowly, heavily, the wolf shifted. For the first time since she had found him, his eyes opened. Mirelle froze. She expected the yellow eyes of an animal, or perhaps the glazed look of death. Instead, she found herself staring into irises the color of a winter moon reflected on steel. They were silver, bright, and piercingly intelligent. There was no confusion in them, no animalistic instinct. He looked at the bandage wrapped around his ribs. He looked at the tattered remains of the blue silk scattered in the mud. And then he looked at her. He saw the tears tracking through the dirt on her face. He saw her shivering. He saw the sacrifice she had just made. And in that gaze, Mirelle felt a sudden, terrifying weight, as if she hadn't just saved a wolf, but had tethered herself to something far more dangerous and far more powerful than the storm raging above them. Chapter 2. The Cruelty of Weressa Crowthorne. Mirelle sat in the snow for a long time, just breathing, the adrenaline crashing out of her system and leaving her hollow. The wolf, the beast with the silver eyes, watched her. He didn't try to move, but his gaze felt like a physical touch, heavy and intense. I can't leave you here, she said finally, her voice raspy. The storm will bury you before morning. She stood up, her legs trembling. She was strong for her size. Years of hauling water buckets and scrubbing stone floors had given her muscles that the village girls lacked. But this wolf was immense. She grabbed his front paws, bracing her boots in the slush. I'm going to pull, she told him, feeling ridiculous for talking to a wolf. Please try to help. She pulled. He was dead weight, heavier than a sack of grain, heavier than a fully loaded cart. She grunted, slipping in the mud, straining until spots danced in her vision. He let out a huff of pain, but then she saw his hind legs kick, digging into the earth. He was pushing. That's it, she gasped. Come on! It took them an hour to move 100 yards. By the time they reached the edge of the forest, where the estate grounds began, Mirelle was exhausted. Her chest burned, and her hands were raw. She collapsed against a tree, weeping silently from the exertion. I can't, she whispered. I can't get you to the stables alone. A twig snapped nearby. Mirelle jumped, spinning around, shielding the wolf with her own small body. A figure emerged from the gloom, carrying a lantern. It was Braun, the old stable master. His face was weathered like old leather, and he walked with a permanent limp, but his eyes were kind. Mirelle, he squinted into the darkness. What in the gods' names are you doing out here? The housekeeper has been screaming for you for an hour. Braun, she sobbed, rushing toward him. Please, I need help. Don't tell her. Just help me. Braun lowered the lantern, and the light fell on the massive black shape behind her. The old man hissed through his teeth. Is that a wolf? He's hurt, Mirelle pleaded, grabbing Braun's rough sleeve. He was dying in the ravine. I couldn't leave him. Braun looked at the wolf, then at the purple-stained silk bandages. He looked at Mirelle's face, streaked with mud and tears, and the desperation in her eyes. He sighed, a long, weary sound. You've got a soft heart, girl, he grumbled. It'll get you killed one day. But he handed her the lantern. Take his head. I'll take the back. If we get caught, I'll say I found you fighting off a bear. With Braun's help, they managed to drag the wolf into the abandoned woodshed behind the main stables. It was a small, drafty structure, smelling of old hay and dry rot, but it was dry and out of the wind. They settled the wolf into a pile of straw in the corner. He let out a deep groan, his silver eyes closing as the exhaustion overtook him. He needs water, Braun said quietly. And you need to get to the house. Look at you. Mirelle looked down. She was a disaster. Her skirt was soaked through and caked with freezing mud. Her cloak was torn from the branches. Her hands were stained with that purple blood. And she had no dress in her bundle. Veressa's going to kill me, she whispered. Go, Braun urged gently. I'll break the ice on the trough and get him some water. Just go. Mirelle nodded, giving the sleeping wolf one last look, and ran toward the manor. The kitchen entrance was warm, smelling of roasting fowl and spices. The contrast to the freezing hell outside was sharp enough to make her dizzy. Mirelle slipped inside, hoping to sneak up the back stairs to the basin to wash. And where? A voice cut through the air like a whip. Have you been? Mirelle froze. Veressa Crowthorne stood in the doorway to the pantry. The housekeeper was a tall, severe woman who wore her authority like armor. Her dress was pristine gray wool, not a hair out of place, her face pinched and sharp. She looked at Mirelle with a mixture of disgust and triumph. The storm, madame, Mirelle stammered, curtsying clumsily. I fell. The path was washed out. Veressa stepped closer, her nose wrinkling. She walked around Mirelle slowly, inspecting her like a piece of spoiled meat. You smell, Veressa said softly, of wet dog and filth. She reached out and poked Mirelle's shoulder, where the mud was thickest. Look at you, disgusting. You were sent to fetch herbs 3 hours ago, and you return like this. I fell, Mirelle repeated, her voice shaking. I'm sorry, I'll clean it up. You fell? Veressa let out a sharp, cruel laugh. You think I was born yesterday. You didn't fall, girl. You've been rolling in the mud. Veressa's eyes narrowed, gleaming with malice. Who was it? Some stable boy? Or did you find a traveler, desperate enough to lift the skirts of a charity case? Mirelle gasped. No, I would never. Don't lie to me, Veressa shouted, the veneer of calm cracking. You are filthy. You are covered in mud and blood. You've been out there acting like a strumpet while honest people are working. She grabbed Mirelle's arm, her fingers digging in painfully. I knew you were trouble, just like your mother, always putting on airs, always thinking you were too good for service. And now look at you. Please, Mirelle cried. It was an animal, a wounded wolf. I helped it, and that's the blood. Please, madam. A wolf? Veressa sneered. You expect me to believe you fought a wolf and lived? You are a liar and a slut. She shoved Mirelle backward. Mirelle stumbled, hitting the heavy wooden table. I will not have a woman of loose morals in this house, Veressa declared, wiping her hands on her apron as if touching Mirelle had contaminated her. You are fired, effective immediately. The world seemed to stop. Fired, Mirelle whispered. But I have nowhere to go. That is not my problem, Veressa said coldly. Gather your things. You're not to sleep in the servants' quarters tonight. I won't have you corrupting the other girls. It's a blizzard outside, Mirelle pleaded, panic rising in her throat. You can't turn me out in the storm. I'll freeze. Veressa smiled, a thin, heartless curving of lips. Then you should have thought of that before you went rolling in the dirt. You can sleep in the woodshed, if you must. But come morning, I want you off this property. My wages? Mirelle asked, desperate. Forfeited, Veressa snapped. To pay for the cleaning of the floor you're dripping on, now get out of my sight. Mirelle fled. She didn't pack a bag because she had nothing to pack. Her spare dress was the one she had just destroyed. Her comb was in her pocket. She had nothing. She ran back out into the cold, the tears freezing on her cheeks. She ran past the stables, past the warm glow of the windows, where the other servants were eating dinner, and collapsed into the woodshed. It was dark and freezing. The wind rattled the loose boards. Mirelle curled up in the hay, pulling her knees to her chest, trying to stop the shaking. She had lost her job. She had lost her home. She had lost her mother's dress. She was going to freeze to death in a shed, and no one would even care. I have nothing, she sobbed into the darkness. I have nothing left. She buried her face in her arms, letting the grief consume her. Then she felt it. A movement in the straw, a heat radiating like a furnace. The massive black wolf had dragged himself across the floor. He pressed his body along the length of her back. He was huge, solid, and incredibly warm. He didn't growl. He didn't bite. He simply curled around her, creating a barrier between her and the cold air. He rested his heavy head on her ankle, anchoring her to the earth. Mirelle froze, then slowly relaxed into the warmth. She reached back, burying her frozen fingers in his thick fur. You're still here, she whispered, her voice breaking. The wolf let out a soft huff against her leg. In the silence of the shed, with the storm raging outside, Mirelle closed her eyes. She had lost her future. She had been cast out by her own kind. But here, in the dirt and the dark, a monster was keeping her warm. The wolf shifted closer, his silver eyes watching her in the darkness. Burning with a silent, terrifying vow, he understood. He knew what she had lost, and as King Malek lay in the straw, listening to the girl's heartbeat slow, he decided that Veressa Crowthorne would not just lose her job. She would lose everything. But for tonight, all he could offer was his heat. So he gave it all to the girl who had ruined her only dress to save him. Chapter 3. Confessions in the Dark. The first day in the woodshed passed in a blur of shivering cold and feverish heat. Mirelle Ashvale had known loneliness her entire life. She was an orphan, a servant, a ghost in the halls of a manor that didn't want her. But she had never felt a silence quite as heavy as the one inside that drafty timber shed. Outside, the blizzard had turned the world into a white, screaming void. Inside, the only sound was the wind rattling the loose boards and the deep, ragged breathing of the wolf. Bron had been true to his word. Early that morning, before the sun had even tried to pierce the gray clouds, the old stable master had slipped in. He hadn't stayed long. Fear of Veressa Crowthorne was a potent motivator, but he had left a bucket of water, a coarse woolen horse blanket, and half a loaf of stale bread, wrapped in a napkin. He's still alive, then, Bron had whispered, eyeing the massive black shape in the corner. Barely, Mirelle had replied. Now it was evening. The shadows stretched long and thin across the dirt floor. Mirelle sat on her knees beside the wolf, a bucket of melted snow water beside her. I have to change the binding, she told him softly. The wolf's ear twitched. His silver eyes watched her, unblinking. There was a terrifying intelligence in that gaze, a depth that made Mirelle feel exposed, as if he could see not just her dirty face, but the frightened, lonely soul beneath it. This is going to hurt, she warned him. She reached out, her hands trembling slightly. She unwrapped the outer layer of the silk strips she had torn from her mother's gown. The fabric was stiff with dried blood and mud. As she peeled away the layer packed closest to the wound, the wolf's body went rigid. A low rumble built in his chest, not quite a growl, but a vibration of pure agony. I know, Mirelle hushed him, dipping a rag into the water. I'm sorry. The wound was ugly. The dark magic that had poisoned him had left the flesh angry and red, but the black rot was gone. The silk had done its job. It had drawn out the worst of the venom. Mirelle cleaned the edges of the cut with gentle, reverent strokes. She wasn't a healer. She was a maid. She knew how to scrub floors and polish silver. She didn't know how to save a life, but she poured every ounce of her focus into the task. You're fighting it, she murmured, wringing out the cloth. You're stronger than you look, and you look like you could eat a bear whole. The wolf huffed, a sound that sounded suspiciously like a scoff. Mirelle smiled. It was a small, fragile thing, but it was real. "I'm serious. I've never seen anything like you. You're magnificent." She finished rebinding the wound with the cleaner strips of silk she had salvaged. Then, exhausted, she slumped back against the wooden wall, pulling the horse blanket around her shoulders. The cold was biting tonight. The woodshed had no hearth, no insulation. Mirelle's teeth began to chatter. The wolf lifted his head. He looked at her shivering form, then at the space beside him in the straw. He let out a soft whine and nudged her knee with his wet nose. Mirelle looked at him. "You want me to—" He nudged her again, harder this time. Hesitantly, Mirelle crawled into the straw beside him. As soon as she settled, the wolf shifted, curling his massive body around her. He was a furnace. His coarse black fur was softer than it looked, thick and warm. He laid his heavy head across her ankles, pinning her in place. The heat was instantaneous. It seeped into her frozen bones, chasing away the chill. Mirelle let out a long, shuddering sigh of relief. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. The second day was quieter. The storm had broken, leaving the world silent and buried under 3 feet of snow. Mirelle spent the hours picking bits of burr and dried mud from the wolf's coat. It was a repetitive, soothing task. As she worked, she found herself talking. She hadn't spoken to anyone in years, not really. She spoke to give reports to Veressa, or to apologize, or to ask for supplies. But she had never just spoken. "This dress," she said, fingers tracing the tattered remains of the blue silk still wrapped around his ribs. "It was supposed to be my ticket out of here." The wolf went still. "My mother left it to me," Mirelle continued, her voice gaining a distant, dreamy quality. "She died when I was 6. It was the only thing of hers I had. I used to sneak it out once a year just to look at it. I'd imagine I was wearing it at the moon festival. I'd imagine a handsome merchant, or maybe a farmer with a kind face, would ask me to dance." She let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Stupid, isn't it?" "A maid dreaming of silk." She stroked the fur behind the wolf's ears. "Veressa caught me with it once," she confided. "She told me that silk on a servant looks like jewels on a pig. She said I was destined to scrub floors until my knees gave out, just like my mother." Mirelle looked down at her hands, rough, red, scarred from work. "Maybe she was right. I tore the dress up. I ruined it. Now I have nothing." She looked into the wolf's silver eyes. "You and I are alike, aren't we?" she whispered, leaning her forehead against his massive shoulder. "Discarded, unwanted, hurt by a world that doesn't care if we live or die." Malek, trapped in the prison of his wolf form, listened to every word. The poison had paralyzed his ability to shift, locking him in this beastly state. But his mind was sharp. He heard the pain in her voice. He felt the phantom touch of the silk she had destroyed to save him. He was the Alpha King. He was Malek Thornveil, the scourge of the East, the warlord of the Black Peaks. He was a man who commanded armies. People brought him gold, land, and daughters, begging for his favor. But this girl, this small, fragile human with hands rough from labor, she had given him everything. She hadn't given him gold. She had given him her dignity. She had given him her hope. He inhaled deeply, drawing her scent into his lungs. It wasn't the cloying perfume of the court ladies. It was simpler, cleaner. She smelled of rainwater caught in a bucket, of dried lavender stored in a pocket, of pine needles and honest work. It was the most intoxicating thing he had ever smelled. "I swear to you," Malek vowed in the silence of his mind, the oath binding itself to his soul, "if I survive this, you will never be cold again. You will never scrub another floor. I will dress you in silk every day of your life, Mirelle Ashvale." He nuzzled his face into her neck, inhaling that scent of rain and lavender, imprinting it onto his memory so deep that death itself couldn't scrub it away. By the third night, the fever was gone entirely. Malek could feel his strength returning. The magic of the silk, imbued with the girl's sacrifice, had accelerated his healing. He could feel the shift approaching. The moon was rising, full and bright. Mirelle was asleep, curled against his stomach, her hand fisted in his fur. She looked so small, so vulnerable. Malek knew he had to leave. If he shifted here, in this small shed, he would be a naked man in a servant's bed. It would compromise her. And worse, his enemies were still out there. If they found him here, they would kill her to get to him. He had to return to the castle, he had to rally his guard, he had to secure the kingdom. But leaving her felt like tearing off a limb. He carefully, agonizingly slowly extricated himself from her grip. She murmured in her sleep, shivering as his warmth left her. Malek paused, his heart twisting. He grabbed the horse blanket with his teeth and pulled it up over her chin. He looked at her one last time. He memorized the curve of her cheek, the dark lashes against her pale skin, the way her hair fanned out in the straw. "Wait for me," he thought fiercely. "I am coming back for you." He slipped out into the night. a shadow moving against the snow. The next morning, the sun broke through the clouds, brilliant and blinding. Mirelle woke up with a smile on her face, the first one in years. She turned over, reaching out for the warm, solid presence of the wolf. Her hand hit cold straw. Mirelle sat up, blinking sleep from her eyes. "Wolf?" The shed was empty. The door was slightly ajar, swinging in the breeze. "No," she whispered. She scrambled up, ignoring the stiffness in her limbs. She checked the corners, she checked the yard outside. There were paw prints in the snow, leading toward the forest, vanishing into the trees. He was gone. He hadn't died, he had healed, and he had left. Mirelle stood in the doorway of the woodshed, clutching the rough woolen blanket to her chest. A hollow ache opened up in her ribs, sharper than hunger, colder than the wind. She had ruined her dress. She had lost her job. She had risked her life. She had poured her heart out to him in the dark, and he had left, without a backward glance. "Of course," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He was a wild thing, and I am just a maid." She sank down onto the threshold, burying her face in her hands, and wept. She was truly, completely alone. Chapter 4. The King's Return. The iron gates of the citadel of Thornveil groaned as they were pushed open, the sound echoing like a thunderclap across the valley. The guards on the battlements snapped to attention, their faces pale. They had been expecting a funeral procession. They had heard rumors that the king had fallen in the Blackwood, struck down by a jagged blade coated in shadow poison. Instead, they saw a lone figure riding a commandeered stallion up the causeway. King Malek Thornveil did not look like a corpse. He looked like vengeance, carved out of granite. He was dressed in a peasant's stolen tunic that strained across his broad shoulders, and his trousers were stained with mud, but the air of command around him was unmistakable. His black hair was windblown, his jaw set in a line of grim fury. But it was his eyes that made the sentries tremble. They were silver, bright, and burning. He rode into the courtyard and dismounted before the horse had even come to a halt. His steward, a frantic man named Lord Corvus, ran down the stone steps, his robes flapping. "Your Majesty," Corvus gasped, looking as if he'd seen a ghost. We thought, the report said—" "The reports were premature," Malek growled. His voice was rough, unused for days, scraping like gravel. "Where is the council?" "In the war room, sire, discussing the succession." "Excellent," Malek said darkly. "I enjoy disappointing them." He stormed up the stairs, throwing the doors to the great hall open with enough force to crack the wood. The council of generals and lords froze. The maps on the table were forgotten. "Your Majesty," General Kale stammered, dropping to one knee. "You live?" "I live," Malek confirmed, stalking to the head of the table. He leaned his hands on the heavy oak, staring down his advisors. "And I am done with this war." "Sire, the border treaties?" one lord began. "Burn the treaties," Malek snapped. "The enemy is broken. I killed their summoner in the ravine before I took the wound. They will not return for a generation. I do not care about borders today." He straightened, his gaze sweeping the room. "I have a new objective." The room went silent. Malek paced, the energy radiating off him, making the air crackle with static. He felt naked without the comforting weight of the blue silk binding his ribs, but the wound was closed, leaving only a jagged silver scar. "I am looking for a woman," Malek announced. The generals exchanged confused glances. Political hostage, sire? A spy?" "A savior," Malek corrected, his voice dropping an octave. "She is young, she is small, she has dark hair and hands that are rough from work." He closed his eyes for a second, inhaling, trying to find that phantom scent in the stale air of the castle. "She smells of rainwater and dried lavender," he said, opening his eyes. "And she will be carrying or wearing the remains of a pale blue silk gown." Lord Corvus frowned. "Blue silk, sire. That is vague. Was she a noble woman?" "No," Malek said softly. "She was not noble. She was something better." He turned to the captain of the guard. "Turn this city upside down. Search every manor, every farm, every servant's quarter within 10 miles of the Blackwood. Check the hands of every maid for calluses. Check their eyes for sadness." "Sire," the captain hesitated. "If she is a commoner, she might be hard to find. They all look alike." Malek moved so fast the eye could barely track him. He slammed his hand onto the table, cracking the wood. "She does not look like the others," he roared, the alpha tone in his voice making the generals flinch. "She is the one who pulled me from the mud. She is the one who tore the clothes off her back to keep my blood inside my body. You will find her. And if anyone has harmed a hair on her head since I left her—" He didn't finish the threat. He didn't have to. The look in his eyes promised fire and ruin. "Go!" The order sent the castle into a frenzy. Trumpets sounded. Squadrons of guards poured out of the gates, fanning out into the countryside like a swarm of angry hornets. 5 miles away, in the manor house of Crowthorne Estate, the sound of the trumpets drifted over the snow-covered hills. Veressa Crowthorne stood by the window of the drawing room, sipping tea from a delicate porcelain cup. She watched the riders galloping down the main road, their banners snapping in the wind. The royal crest. Trouble, she muttered to herself. She turned to the fireplace, where her daughter Brizzelle was lazily embroidering a handkerchief. Brizzelle was a pretty girl, in a shallow, doll-like way, but she had her mother's cruel mouth. The King's Guard is patrolling, Veressa said. I wonder what they want. Just then, the back door slammed open. Veressa stiffened. She marched into the kitchen to find the cook, wide-eyed and panting. Madame, the cook gasped. Have you heard? The king! He's alive! Veressa's grip on her teacup tightened. Alive? He returned this morning, the cook chattered, eager to be the bearer of news. And he's in a rage. The criers are saying he's hunting for a woman, a mysterious woman who saved his life in the Blackwood during the storm. Veressa went very still. Did they say who this woman was? No name, the cook shook her head. But they say she's a servant girl. And they say the king is looking for a specific clue. Something about a blue silk dress. Crash. Veressa dropped her teacup. It shattered on the stone floor, spraying tea everywhere. Blue silk. A servant girl in the Blackwood? Veressa's mind raced back to 2 days ago. Mirelle standing in this very kitchen, covered in mud and blood. Mirelle claiming she had saved a wounded wolf. Mirelle who had owned a secret bundle wrapped in oilcloth that Veressa had never bothered to open. Get out, Veressa whispered. Madame? I said get out, she shrieked. The cook fled. Veressa grabbed her cloak and ran out the back door. She ignored the cold, her boots crunching through the snow as she marched toward the old woodshed. She threw the door open. The shed was empty, but the evidence was there. The straw was flattened in the corner, matted down by a heavy weight. And there, snagged on a rusty nail near the floorboards, was a strip of fabric. Veressa knelt and plucked it loose. It was silk. Fine, expensive silk, the kind a lady would wear. It was stained purple with dark blood and stiff with dried mud, but the color was unmistakable. Pale, shimmering blue. Mirelle hadn't been lying. She hadn't been rolling with a lover. She had been saving a wolf. But the wolf wasn't a wolf. The king, Veressa breathed, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. She saved the king. She looked at the bloody rag in her hand. Fear clawed at her throat. She had fired the savior of the realm. She had thrown the king's angel out into the blizzard. If the king found Mirelle, if Mirelle told him what Veressa had done, Veressa would be ruined. She would be stripped of her position, perhaps even imprisoned. Unless... A slow, wicked smile spread across Veressa's face. The king didn't know Mirelle's name. The cook had said so. He was looking for a servant. He was looking for blue silk. Mirelle was gone. Veressa had kicked her off the estate days ago. She was likely freezing in a ditch somewhere, or begging in the next village. She was a nobody. But Veressa had a daughter who was young and pretty and obedient. She clenched the bloody silk in her fist and hurried back to the house. She burst into the drawing room, startling Brizzelle. Mother? Brizzelle asked, eyeing the dirty rag in Veressa's hand. What is that disgusting thing? Opportunity, Veressa said, her eyes gleaming with a manic light. Get up, Brizzelle. Why? We are going to your closet, Veressa ordered, pulling her daughter toward the stairs. Do you still have that blue gown? The one with the lace bodice? Yes, but it's old-fashioned. Put it on, Veressa commanded. And fetch the scissors. The scissors? Mother, what are you talking about? Veressa stopped at the foot of the stairs. She gripped Brizzelle's shoulders, staring intently into her daughter's confused eyes. Listen to me very carefully. You are going to put on your blue dress. We are going to tear the skirt. We are going to smear some mud on your face. Mother! Brizzelle gasped in horror. Do as I say, Veressa hissed, because in an hour we are going to the castle, and you are going to tell the king that you are the one who saved his life. But I didn't! He doesn't know that? Veressa smoothed Brizzelle's hair, her touch cold and calculating. He is a king, darling. He is grateful. And grateful kings give their saviors anything they want. Jewels, titles, perhaps even a crown. Brizzelle's eyes widened. A crown? Now! Veressa shoved the bloody scrap of Mirelle's silk into her pocket. Go upstairs. We have a destiny to steal. Chapter 5, The Stolen Valor, Ewer. The great hall of Thornveil Castle was suffocating. It was a cavernous space with ceilings high enough to trap shadows and stained glass windows that turned the winter light into pools of blood, red and royal blue. Usually it smelled of beeswax and old stone. Today it smelled of desperation. King Malek sat on the obsidian throne, a chair carved from a single piece of black volcanic rock that looked more like a weapon than a seat. He was still wearing his travel clothes, the stolen tunic and muddy trousers, refusing to change into his royal velvet until he found her. He looked like a wolf trapped in a cage of gold. His leg bounced with restless energy. His fingers drummed a lethal rhythm on the armrest. Next, he growled. The chamberlain, a sweating man in a powdered wig, banged his staff on the floor. Lady Ilara of the High Veil, a young woman in green silk, stepped forward. She curtsied low, her eyes batting up at the king with practiced coyness. She held a scrap of blue fabric in her hands. Your Majesty, she murmured. It was I who found you in the storm. Malek didn't even stand up. He leaned forward, his nostrils flaring slightly. He took a shallow breath. Lilac, he said flatly. And stale powder. Get out. The woman's face crumbled. But sire, I said get out, Malek roared, the sound echoing off the stone walls like a cannon shot. You are lying. Do not test my patience today. Guards stepped forward to escort the weeping woman away. Malek slumped back, rubbing his temples. This was the 50th woman. They had come from every corner of the valley, drawn by the rumor of a royal reward. They brought scraps of blue cloth torn from curtains, from bedsheets, from old gowns. They brought stories that fell apart the moment he looked them in the eye. None of them were her. None of them had the calluses on their hands. None of them had the haunted look in their eyes. And none of them smelled like rain and lavender. Is this it? Malek asked Lord Corvus, his voice low and dangerous. Is this the best my kingdom has to offer? A parade of liars? Sire, there are more arriving, Corvus said soothingly. Word has spread to the outlying estates. We must be patient. Malek growled low in his throat. His wolf was pacing inside his skin, clawing at his ribs. She is out there, the wolf whispered. She is cold. Find her. 3 miles away, at the Crowthorne estate, Mirelle Ashvale was indeed cold. She was huddled in the corner of the tack room, inside the main stable block. The room was small, smelling of oiled leather and horse sweat. There were no windows, only thin slats of light coming through the heavy wooden door. And the door was locked from the outside. Veressa had found her that morning. Mirelle had been trying to sneak out of the woodshed to fill her water bucket from the trough. She hadn't been fast enough. Veressa hadn't screamed. She hadn't yelled. She had simply smiled, a terrifying thin smile, and summoned 2 of the stable hands. Lock her up, Veressa had ordered. I won't have this filth wandering around while I am gone on important business. Business? Mirelle had asked, confused and frightened. The king is holding court, Veressa had said, her eyes gleaming with a manic light. He wishes to thank the woman who saved him. Brazil and I are going to collect the reward. Mirelle had gone cold. Brazil? But she didn't save him. She will now, Veressa had laughed. And you, my dear little rat, will stay in the tack room until we return. Then, I will decide what to do with you. Perhaps the mines are hiring. Now, hours later, Mirelle sat in the darkness, listening to the muffled sounds of the world outside. She heard horses nickering, she heard the wind, and in the distance, she heard trumpets. Root toot toot. The sound was faint but clear, the royal fanfare. Mirelle hugged her knees to her chest. To her, those trumpets didn't sound like a celebration. They sounded like a judgment. He's looking for the person who saved him, she whispered to the darkness. But Veressa is going to tell him it was Brazil. A tear tracked through the dirt on her cheek. He won't know, she realized with a sickening lurch of her stomach. He was a wolf. He never saw my face clearly. He never heard my name. He only saw the dress. And Veressa had taken the bloody silk from the woodshed. Mirelle had checked. The proof was gone. He will believe her, Mirelle sobbed quietly. Brazil is pretty. She is clean. She has a mother who fights for her. Why wouldn't he believe her? She imagined the wolf, her magnificent silver-eyed wolf, bowing before Brazil. She imagined him letting Brazil pet him, unaware that she was the daughter of the woman who had cast his true savior out into the snow. The thought broke her heart more than the hunger gnawing at her belly. I hope you're happy, she whispered to the memory of the wolf. I hope she treats you better than she treated me. Back in the great hall, the heavy oak doors swung open again. Lady Veressa Crowthorne, the chamberlain announced, and her daughter, Mistress Brazil. Malek looked up. His interest piqued slightly. Crowthorne, that was the estate near the woods, where he had collapsed. Veressa walked in first. She wore stiff grey wool and an expression of mournful solemnity. She curtsied low, her movements precise and practiced. Behind her walked a young woman. She was blonde, pretty in a conventional way, though her eyes were darting around the room nervously. But it was what she was wearing that made Malek gripping the armrests of his throne so hard the stone groaned. She was wearing a blue silk gown. It was pale, shimmering blue, but the skirt was ruined. It had been torn into ragged strips, the hem uneven and muddy. Malek stood up. The movement was sudden, violent. The entire court went silent. "You!" he breathed. Veressa stepped aside, nudging Brizzell forward. "Go on, child," she urged loudly enough for the court to hear. "Tell His Majesty what you did." Brizzell took a trembling step forward. She looked at the towering, dark-haired king, and her fear looked genuine. To the court, it looked like modesty. Your Majesty," Brizzell stammered. I was in the woods, during the storm." Malek descended the steps of the dais. He moved like a predator stalking prey, his eyes locked on the blue silk. "Go on," he commanded softly. "I found a wolf," Brizzell recited, her voice gaining a little confidence as she remembered her mother's script. "He was hurt. Bleeding. I didn't have any bandages, so I tore my dress." She reached into the pocket of the gown and pulled out a rolled-up strip of fabric. It was stiff. It was stained purple with dark blood. Malek stopped 3 feet from her. He stared at the bloody rag. He recognized that blood. It was his own. A murmur went through the crowd. "The proof," someone whispered. "It's her." Veressa stepped forward, looking every inch the proud mother. "My daughter risked her life, sire. She ruined her best gown to save a beast she didn't even know. She is a girl of rare compassion." Malek ignored Veressa. He only had eyes for Brizzell. "You did this," he asked, his voice thick with suppressed emotion. "You bound my wounds. You kept me warm in the shed." Brizzell looked at his handsome face, at the crown resting on his dark hair, at the wealth and power radiating off him. The greed flared in her eyes, overriding her fear. "Yes, Your Majesty," she lied. "It was me." "I held you all night." Malek closed his eyes. Relief crashed into him. He had found her. After the pain, after the cold, after the desperate search, she was here. "Come here," he whispered. Brizzell smiled, a triumphant little quirk of her lips. She stepped into his personal space, tilting her neck up, expecting a kiss, or perhaps a necklace. Malek leaned down. He didn't kiss her. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, right where the pulse beat beneath the skin. He inhaled deeply, desperate for the scent that had haunted his dreams. He wanted the rain. He wanted the lavender. He wanted the pine. He inhaled, and his eyes snapped open. The scent that filled his nose was cloying and sweet. It smelled of artificial rosewater, heavy and suffocating. Beneath that, it smelled of sweat. And beneath that, something sharp and metallic, the scent of a lie. The wolf inside him recoiled, snarling. "Imposter!" Malek pulled back so fast, Brizzell stumbled. His face had transformed. The relief was gone, replaced by a mask of absolute terrifying fury. His upper lip curled back, revealing teeth that looked too sharp for a human man. "What is this?" he growled. Brizzell blinked, confused. "Sire?" "You smell," Malek said, his voice rising to a shout that shook the banners on the walls. "Of rosewater and greed." The silence in the hall was deafening. "Sire, I don't understand," Brizzell whimpered, backing away. "You are not her," Malek snarled, advancing on her. "You are wearing the dress. You have the blood, but you are not the woman who held me." He turned his burning gaze on Veressa. The housekeeper's face had gone pale, her composure cracking. "Where did you get that silk?" Malek demanded. "Where did you get the blood?" My daughter," Veressa stammered. "She is the one. She saved you. Perhaps the scent is different because she has bathed, sire. She washed off the mud." "You cannot wash away the soul," Malek roared. "The woman who saved me had hands rough from work. Your daughter's hands are soft as butter. The woman who saved me spoke to me of loneliness. Your daughter looks at me and sees a bank vault." He grabbed Brizzell's wrist, lifting her hand up for the court to see. There were no calluses, no scars. "A forgery!" Malek spat, dropping her hand as if it were burning coal. "A cheap insult of a forgery!" He turned to his guards. "Lock the doors. No one leaves." He spun back to Veressa, looming over her until she shrank down, trembling. "You have the dress," he said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "You have the blood, which means you know who the real savior is." I... Veressa couldn't speak. "Where is she?" Malek roared. "Where is the woman who belongs in that dress?" Chapter 6. The Angel in the Mud. The stable door shattered inward with a splintering crash. Mirelle screamed, scrambling back into the corner of the tack room, covering her head. Mirelle, where are you?" It wasn't a guard, it was Braun. The old stablemaster limped through the ruin of the door, holding a heavy iron pry bar. He looked frantic, his chest heaving, his face red from exertion. Mirelle gasped, lowering her hands. What are you doing? Veressa locked me in. Veressa's a viper, Bron spat, throwing the pry bar down. He rushed over and grabbed Mirelle's arm, pulling her up. And she's at the castle right now trying to steal your life. What? I heard the grooms talking, Bron said, dragging her out of the room. Veressa took Brizzelle to the king. She took the bloody rags from the shed. She's claiming Brizzelle saved the wolf. Mirelle stumbled, her legs stiff from hours of sitting. I knew it, she whispered, a sob choking her. I knew she would. Well, I'm not letting it happen, Bron growled. I've watched that woman torment you for 3 years. I watched you tear up your mother's dress for a beast. I'm not letting her take the credit for your heart, girl. But what can we do? Mirelle cried, resisting as he pulled her toward the stable yard. They're nobles. Or, close enough, I'm nobody. Look at me, Bron, I'm filthy. You're the one who did the saving, Bron said stubbornly. He pointed to an old cart horse he had already saddled. Get on. Bron, I can't go to the castle like this. Mirelle looked down at herself. She was wearing her working dress, brown, coarse wool that was stained with stable muck and 3 days of grime. Her hair was a tangled mess. She had a bruise on her cheek where Veressa had slapped her. She smelled of horses and old hay. The king is looking for a savior, not a princess, Bron said, hoisting her onto the horse with surprising strength. Now ride like the devil is snapping at your heels. Mirelle grabbed the reins. She was terrified. She was shaking, but a spark of anger lit in her chest. That was her wolf. That was her sacrifice. She kicked the horse into a gallop. The ride to the castle was a blur of wind and snow. Mirelle didn't stop at the gates. The guards, seeing a woman riding hell for leather on a cart horse, shouted for her to halt, but Bron, following behind on a second horse, yelled something at them that made them hesitate. She reached the courtyard, slid off the horse, and ran up the stone steps. The great oak doors of the hall were closed. 2 massive guards stood before them, arms crossed. Halt! One boomed. The king has ordered the doors sealed. Let me in! Mirelle gasped, breathless. Please! The woman inside! She's lying! We have orders, girl, no beggars. She's not a beggar, Bron shouted, limping up the stairs behind her. She's the one he's looking for. The guard laughed. Her? Look at her! She looks like she crawled out of a pigsty. Mirelle didn't wait. She didn't argue. She heard a voice from inside the hall, a deep, roaring voice that she recognized, a voice that sounded like a growl she had heard in a woodshed. Where is she? It was him. Mirelle didn't think. She ducked under the guard's arm. He grabbed at her cloak, but the clasp snapped, leaving the cloak in his hand. She threw her shoulder against the smaller side door used for servants. It wasn't barred. She tumbled into the great hall. The noise of her entry was small, just a stumble and a gasp. But in the deadly silence of the room, it sounded like a thunderclap. Every head turned. Mirelle froze. She was on her knees on the polished marble floor. The room was dazzling. Gold velvet, jewels. Hundreds of nobles in their finest clothes were staring at her. And she was a stain on their perfection. A dirty, bruised, disheveled servant girl in a brown dress that was unraveling at the hem. Get that filth out of here, Veressa's voice shrieked from near the throne. The housekeeper pointed a trembling finger at Mirelle. Guards, seize her, she's a trespasser. 2 guards started toward her. Mirelle wanted to run. She wanted to curl into a ball and disappear. Then she looked up, and she saw him. He was standing on the steps of the dais. He was terrifying. Tall, broad, dressed in black and silver, with a crown resting on his brow. He looked like a god of war, but his eyes, they were silver. They were the color of the moon on winter ice. They were the eyes that had watched her destroy her mother's dress. They were the eyes that had watched her cry in the dark. It's you, she whispered. Malek went completely still. The guards were closing in on Mirelle. Veressa was screaming orders. Brizzelle was weeping. But Malek didn't hear any of it. His head snapped toward the side door. His nostrils flared. It cut through the perfume. It cut through the sweat of the crowd. It cut through the lies. Rainwater, clear and cold. Dried lavender, sweet and humble. Pine, sharp and enduring. It was the scent of safety. Stop, Malek commanded. The word wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. The guards froze mid-step. Malek walked down the stairs. He ignored Brizzelle. He ignored Veressa. He ignored his counsel. He walked straight toward the dirty girl kneeling by the door. The crowd parted for him like the Red Sea, gasping as their king approached the stable girl. Mirelle couldn't move. She watched him come closer, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. He was so big. In the shed, lying down, he had been massive. But standing up, he was a giant. He stopped 2 inches from her. He towered over her. He could crush her with one hand. Slowly, terrifyingly slowly, Malek dropped to his knees. The court gasped. The king was kneeling on the floor. His expensive trousers were soaking up the mud, dripping from her hem. He didn't care. He was eye level with her now. He looked at her face. He saw the streaks of dirt. He saw the tangled hair. He saw the fear in her brown eyes. And then, his gaze fastened on her cheek. A purple bruise blossomed there, the mark of a hand. Varessa's hand. A low, vibrating growl started in Malek's chest, a sound so primal that the nobles nearest to them stepped back in fear. His eyes flashed, the pupils dilating until the silver was nearly swallowed by black. He reached out. His hand, large, scarred, powerful, trembled slightly. Mirelle flinched, expecting a blow. Malek froze. The sight of her flinching from him broke something inside his chest. "No," he whispered, his voice rough and agonizingly tender. "Never from me. Never again." He moved his hand again, slower this time. He cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing incredibly gently over the bruise, as if he could wipe away the pain with a touch. Mirelle stopped breathing. His hand was warm. It was the same heat that had kept her alive in the shed. "You," Malek breathed, looking into her eyes as if she were the only person in the universe. "You are the one." I ruined my dress," Mirelle stammered, the tears spilling over. "I'm sorry I look like this. I have nothing left." Malek smiled. It wasn't a polite court smile. It was a fierce, broken, beautiful thing. "You have everything," he said. "You have me." He leaned his forehead against hers, closing his eyes, inhaling her scent like a drowning man finding air. "You are the one who kept me warm when the world went cold," he whispered, his voice shaking with the force of his vow. "And now, I am going to burn the world for you." Chapter 7. Burned the world. The silence in the great hall was shattered by a shriek. "This is madness!" Veressa Crowthorne pushed past the stunned guards, her face twisted into a mask of indignant rage. She pointed a trembling finger at Mirelle, who was still kneeling on the marble floor, sheltered by the king's body. "Your Majesty, you cannot be serious!" Veressa cried, her voice shrill with panic. "Look at her! She is a servant! She is filth! I fired her 3 days ago for indecency. She was rolling in the mud with a stable boy." Mirelle shrank back, the old habit of fear making her lower her head. "I wasn't," she whispered. "I wasn't." Malek stood up. The motion was slow, like a mountain rising from the sea. He turned away from Mirelle to face Veressa, and the tenderness that had been in his eyes vanished instantly. In its place was a cold, black void of judgment. "Indecency," Malek repeated, his voice low and deadly, rumbling through the hall like distant thunder. "Yes," Veressa insisted, desperate to salvage the narrative. "She is a liar and a thief. She corrupted the morals of my household. That is why I cast her out." Malek took a step toward her. Veressa stumbled back, tripping over the hem of her expensive gray wool dress. "You cast her out," Malek said, "because she saved your king." He pointed to the bruise on Mirelle's cheek. "You struck her. You called her filth. You threw her into a blizzard with no coat, no money, and no home. And while she sat in a freezing woodshed, keeping my blood inside my body, you sat by your fire, drinking tea and plotting how to steal her glory." The color drained from Veressa's face until she looked like a corpse. "Sire, I didn't know it was you." "Would it have mattered?" Malek roared. The sound hit the room with physical force. The stained glass windows rattled. "If I had been a common soldier, would her sacrifice have meant less? If I'd been a stray dog, would her kindness have been a crime?" He looked at Brazelle, who was cowering behind her mother, still wearing the forged blue dress. "You stand there in stolen silk," Malek spat. "You claim a valor you do not possess. You are parasites." He turned to his captain of the guard. "Strip them!" Veressa gasped. "Your Majesty." "You took everything from her," Malek said cold. "You took her job, you took her home, you took her reputation, so I will take everything from you." He gestured to the door. "Strip them of their titles. Strip them of the Crowthorne estate. Seize their lands, their vaults, and their horses, and take those fine clothes off their backs. Give them the rags Mirelle is wearing, and throw them out the gates." "No!" Veressa screamed, falling to her knees. "You can't! It's winter! We will freeze!" Malek looked down at her without a flicker of pity. "Then I suggest you find a woodshed. Get them out of my sight." The guards moved in. Veressa's screams and Brazelle's sobbing echoed off the stone walls as they were dragged from the hall. The heavy doors slammed shut behind them, sealing their fate. The hall was silent again. Malek took a deep breath, the red rage fading from his vision. He turned back to the girl on the floor. Mirelle was trembling. She looked at the door where Veressa had vanished, then up at the king. She looked terrified. Not of him, but of the situation. She looked down at her own dirty hands, at the mud staining the pristine white marble. She started to scramble backward. I should go, she stammered. I'm making a mess. I'm ruining your floor. She looked at his heavy velvet cape, trimmed with white ermine fur, that pooled around his boots. She pulled her muddy skirts away, terrified of dirtying the royal fabric. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so dirty. Malek's heart cracked. Mirelle, he said softly. She wouldn't look at him. She was too ashamed of her poverty, too aware of the gap between a maid and a king. Malek reached up to his shoulders. He unclasped the heavy gold chain that held his royal cape in place. The court gasped. That cape was a symbol of his office. It was worth more than the entire Crowthorne Manor. Malek pulled it off, and then with a deliberate sweeping motion, he dropped it. He threw the priceless velvet and ermine right onto the muddy floor. It landed with a heavy, muffled thud, soaking up the grime. Your Majesty, the Chamberlain cried out in horror. Your cape! Malek ignored him. He stepped onto the ruined cape and sank to his knees again, placing himself directly in the mud, directly in front of Mirelle. He took her rough, dirty hands in his. You ruined your dress for me, he said, his voice ringing clear and loud, ensuring every noble in the room heard him. You tore apart the only beautiful thing you owned to save a beast who couldn't even thank you. He squeezed her hands. So I will ruin this cape. I will ruin this floor. I will burn this entire kingdom to ash before I let you feel unworthy for another second. Mirelle looked up, tears streaming down her face, cutting tracks through the dirt. Malek, she whispered, using his name for the first time. I don't want a princess, Malek vowed. I don't want a lady of the court who smells of powder and lies. I want the girl who shared her heat with me in the dark. He reached into his tunic and pulled out a ring. It wasn't a diamond. It was a band of silver, etched with wolves. Be my queen, Mirelle, he asked, his voice cracking with emotion. Let me buy you all the silk in the world. Let me spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the woman who saved me. Mirelle looked at the ring. Then she looked at the man kneeling in the dirt for her. The man who had destroyed his enemies and his own finery just to make her smile. She wasn't afraid anymore. She nodded. Yes, she choked out. Yes! Malek didn't wait. He slid the ring onto her dirty finger. Then he pulled her into his arms, crushing her against his chest, heedless of the mud, heedless of the crowd. He kissed her. It wasn't a tentative kiss. It was a claim. It was a promise. It was the fire of the hearth after a long, cold winter. Mirelle closed her eyes and melted into him. For the first time in her life, she wasn't the orphan or the servant or the outcast. She was safe. She was home. And she was loved by a king who would burn the world just to keep her warm. Mirelle sacrificed her only treasure and gained a love that would burn the world for her. I hope the story brought a little warmth to your holiday. I have a small request for my pack. I am working hard to upgrade my studio so I can bring King Malek's voice to life with the quality you deserve. If you want to help me get better tools for these voiceovers, please consider showing some love on my support page. You can find the link in the description box below and in the pinned comment. Even a small contribution helps me create more magic for you. Thank you for listening, and once again, happy Thanksgiving.